You're listening to The Place We Find Ourselves. I'm Adam Young, and we're in the middle of a series of episodes designed to help you engage with someone who has harmed you. If you want to, just before we get started, if you want to get episodes as soon as they are released and support the podcast, please remember to go to my website, get the Place We Find Ourselves app, and sign up for $30 per year or $3 a month. New episodes released to the app 4 weeks before they are available on Apple Podcasts and everywhere else. And if you don't want the app, you can still make a donation directly from my website. So please consider doing this because your financial support keeps the podcast going. Let me summarize where we've been so far. This is part 4. We are attempting to answer the question, how do I interact with someone who has done harm to me? And in the first episode of this series, I explained that there are at least 3 kinds of people in the world. There are normal, everyday sinners, wicked people, and evil people. And I suggested that you have to engage each of these categories of people differently. The fundamental attribute that distinguishes normal sinners from wicked people is that wicked people refuse to suffer the experience of guilt. They refuse to feel the feeling of guilt or shame. The primary attribute of wicked people is that they refuse to examine their heart and ask, what have I done? How have I hurt this person? In part 2, we looked at 2 more attributes that tend to characterize wicked people, namely scapegoating and intellectual deviousness. If you confront a wicked person about their sin or failure, instead of examining their heart and feeling sorrow and guilt for how they have hurt you, a wicked person will somehow shift the blame onto your failure and your sin. This is scapegoating. And intellectual deviousness refers to the ways that wicked people use words to twist truth, avoid guilt, and fill you with self-doubt. And then in the previous episode, part 3, we looked at what it actually means to love another person, what it actually means to honor your father and mother. At least we began that endeavor. And we said that love always disrupts the status quo. When you love your father well, his heart will either harden toward you or his heart will soften toward you. But the status quo of the relationship will be no more. So if your relationship with your mother is basically the same today as it was 5 years ago, then I know this sounds harsh, but you have not loved your mother well over the past 5 years, because love changes the dynamic of relationships. Your task, of course, is to honor your father and mother. But what does it mean to honor one's father and mother? And I made 2 points here. Number 1, much of what you think of as honoring your parents is not honoring at all. In other words, a passive pleasantness in which you never disrupt the current state of an unhealthy relationship, that's not honoring. It's not. And then conversely, much of what you may think of as dishonoring your parents is oftentimes the beginning of a heart to do them good. Your desire to talk to your parents about some of the ways they have hurt you often comes from a longing for a deeper, more honest relationship with them. Okay, that's a summary of where we've been. That brings us to today. Here's how I'd like to start today. Dan Allender is fond of saying that wickedness is like a cancer growing inside someone's heart. And Dan points out that there are 3 ways of dealing with cancer: burning, cutting, and poisoning. You can burn it, radiation, cut it out, surgery, or poison it, chemotherapy. So to love a wicked person, to treat their cancer, is to be willing to burn, to cut, to poison. Here's where the analogy falls apart. All people with cancer consent to the treatment. And most of them want the treatment. Wicked people, on the other hand, do not want the treatment. Therefore, you need to be cunning, shrewd, disruptive. Think surprise attacks of disruptive kindness rather than direct confrontation. Direct confrontation is not going to work with a wicked person. Let me say that again. Direct confrontation, head-on, reasonable engagement. It is not going to work with a wicked person. And here's an example of what I mean by direct confrontation. Dad, I've realized that when I was a boy, you were not fond of me. You spewed contempt on me nearly every night at the dinner table. You rarely came to my sporting events or celebrated my successes. Could we talk about why you hated me so much? Okay. Right, that's direct confrontation. Now, if you say that to a garden variety sinner, if your father is a normal everyday sinner, he's going to be cut to the heart when he hears those words come out of your mouth. But what's going to happen if you say that to a wicked father? It will only intensify his rage at you, and he will find some way to place blame back on your head. For example, he's likely to respond with some version of, "Son, how could you say that? That I hated you? How could you even think that about me? I worked hard every day of my life so there could be food on the dinner table. The reason I couldn't make your sporting events is because I was working hard to support you and your brothers. And I don't know what you mean about spewing contempt at dinner time. I remember joking around with you, but all fathers do that with their sons." Here's the point. Direct confrontation is not going to work with a wicked person. Now, someone may be thinking, wait a minute, what are you supposed to do if you aren't sure what kind of person you are engaging with? What if you're not sure if your dad is a wicked person or a normal everyday sinner? You have to find out. And the way you find out is by offering what the Bible calls a pearl. If you don't know what kind of person you're dealing with, the way to find out is to offer the other person a pearl and see what they do with it. What is a pearl? A pearl is, Dad, when I think back on my growing up years, I remember feeling like you were often critical of me. That's a pearl. You are giving your father a gift by telling him how you experienced him growing up. And you are caring for yourself by limiting the damage he is able to do to you if he demonstrates that he's wicked. So you need to find out, what's your dad going to do with the pearl that you just offered him? Why do you need to find that out? Because your dad's response will determine whether or not it is honoring and wise to share more with him. That is, to give him another pearl, or to pull back, reevaluate, and take a different approach. If your father says, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea you felt that way. Tell me more." And if you sense that your father is heartsick about what you have just spoken to him, in other words, that your words have moved him on the inside, then you're dealing with a normal garden variety sinner with a conscience. And you can give him another pearl by telling him more about the hurt. But if your father's response indicates that there's no curiosity about how he may have harmed you, if there's no heartache about what this must have been like for you, then you're likely dealing with a wicked man who has hardened his heart. His conscience is seared. He feels no shame. So, what are you going to do? And again, I'll quote Dan Allender and Tremper Longman from their book, Bold Love. And this is what they say. The key to loving a wicked person is judicious, well-planned disruption. The key is insightful preparation. Here are the three things they name: insightful preparation, clear boundaries, and courageous consequences. The key to loving a wicked person is judicious, well-planned disruption. Tremper and Dan are saying that your task is to disrupt the status quo, and you do that in three ways: insightful preparation, and I'm going to flesh these out, clear boundaries, and courageous consequences. Let's look at each of these three endeavors in turn. First, insightful preparation. You have to tailor your words to the kind of person you're dealing with. So, what kind of person is your mother? You know her. You've been in relationship with her for decades. You have some idea of how she is going to respond when you say, "Mom, could we talk about some of the painful experiences of my growing up years?" And since you have some idea of how she is going to respond, you can write a mini screenplay. Yes, a mini screenplay. I do this exercise with my clients all the time. It can actually be quite fun. A super mini screenplay, 5 lines. This is part of insightful preparation. You are going to script the conversation you're about to have with your mother. But I don't know what my mom is going to say. Of course, on the one hand, of course you don't. But on the other hand, sure you do. You know this woman. You may not know her exact words, but you have some idea of how she is going to respond if you broach the subject of your hurt. And here's the thing. The more you engage with her about her failure, the more you will learn about how she responds when you say, "Ouch, that hurt, Mom." So you may not know exactly how she's going to respond the first time you bring it up, but you will be far more prepared the second and third time. And so your mini screenplay will become more and more accurate, which means that you will be more skilled engaging your mother in a year than you are right now. You will be more prepared to speak to your mother in 3 months than you are today. All right, let's take an example. Suppose that the following conversation is what happened the last time you tried to talk to your mom about how she hurt you. Daughter, here's what the daughter says. "Mom, I've come to realize some of the ways I was hurt by you growing up. Could we talk about it?" Mom says, "Sweetheart, I have fully supported you from day one. If you don't know that, then I don't know what to say. You're the one that needs to get past this. This is a two-way street. Your father and I have always loved you. What has stirred up this bitterness all of a sudden? You've never mentioned these things before." Daughter, "Well, I've begun counseling and I'm just starting to realize some of the ways that I felt harmed by you when I was younger." Mom, "I have always loved you unconditionally, but somehow my love and support is not enough for what you need. I don't know how to make you feel how much I love you. God calls us to forgive and to be reconciled to one another. God's love can help us work through this." Okay, that's what happened the last time you talked to Mom. Let's look at the conversation. Let's just unpack it. It's a doozy. First of all, who's controlling the conversation? The mother is. And she is a deeply wicked woman, by the way. Your first task with a wicked person, your first task is to take away their power. Let me say that again. Your first task when you're engaging with a wicked person is to take away their manipulative power. Here's how Dan Allender puts it. He says, "An enormously good gift to give a wicked person is to foil their effort to win, to frustrate their attempts to dominate. Wickedness can never be overthrown through rational, reasonable argumentation." That's Dan Allender. If you want to love this mother well in this little vignette, you've got to take away her power. And you can't do that by presenting a rational, reasonable argument. Why? Why can't you do that? Because you can't engage a wicked woman the way you would engage a garden variety sinner. You can't say, ouch, you hurt me, to a wicked mother and expect her to be moved by your words. Expect her to be curious about how she hurt you and expect her to be sorrowful and to empathize with you. So you've got to take away her power. How? By naming what's going on right now. By naming what's happening in the present moment. The conversation you're having right now. For example, here's line 5 of the screenplay. Mom, it's happening right now. I said I was hurt by your lack of support. And in this moment, you are being unsupportive. And then here's the critical line for you to say to your mother. Mom, are you interested in hearing about the hurt in my heart right now? This question disrupts the status quo. It takes the spotlight off the past and shines it on the present interaction, what's happening right now in vivo. The goal, what's the goal? Twofold: to expose and to invite. To expose mom's wickedness so she feels some shame. And then to invite her to repentance, which is simply another way of saying inviting her to become more beautiful, more glorious, more who she truly is inside. Here's how Allender pinpoints your task. This is, again, from the book Bold Love. Tremper and Dan say, sometimes what is called for is a cunning strategy in which you outmaneuver the enemy for the purpose of rendering her powerless so that you can offer her the opportunity for restoration. Notice that part about rendering her powerless. That's what you're aiming for. Rendering her powerless is your goal. Why? Isn't that cruel? Why would I do that? What's the goal of taking away her power? So that you can offer her the opportunity for restoration. Let me read the words again, the quote. Sometimes what is called for is a cunning strategy in which you outmaneuver the enemy for the purpose of rendering her powerless so that you can offer her the opportunity for restoration. In other words, your relationship with your mom cannot be restored until mom stops using slippery speech to ignore you, dismiss you, and shift the blame away from her and onto you. Remember, mom's perspective on this whole dialogue is, it's not my failure as a mother that's coming between us. It's your bitterness. It's your refusal to receive my unconditional love. I mean, doesn't that just make you squirm inside? This is a highly sophisticated, wicked woman, very skilled at spinning truth. But remember, this woman, like all of us, is created in the image of God. And as such, there is plenty of glory and beauty inside of her, which means that she still has the capacity to soften her heart toward her daughter and to have a genuine, authentic, healed relationship. All right, back to the conversation. You just said to Mom, Mom, are you interested in hearing about the hurt in my heart right now? Let's suppose that Mom replies by saying, of course I care about your heart. That's what I've been trying to say. Your father and I have always loved you. I just don't understand what has stirred up all this bitterness in you. Now, this is what Dan means by insightful preparation. You need to be prepared to respond to this kind of wicked power play. So how would you like to respond to your mother? Remember, your task is to take away her power. In other words, don't get sucked in to her blame shifting. Don't get sucked in by answering the question about why you've become so bitter all of a sudden. Wicked people can be very slippery with their words as they try to trick you into feeling that you are the one doing the harm just by bringing it up. So your task is to take away her power and then shame her as you invite her to repentance. Here's a possible response. Mom, are you interested in being a mother to me right now and owning your part in how you have harmed me? Mom, are you interested in being a mother to me right now and owning your part in how you have harmed me? It's a question. You are inviting her to be a mother to you, her daughter. And you are placing the spotlight back on her unwillingness to own her harm of you. Now, this is just an example. I know it's not identical to how your mom or dad will respond, but here's what I want you to grapple with. In your relationship with your mother and father right now, where are you currently losing your voice? Where in the conversation do you suddenly find yourself silenced and you don't know what to say? Think back on the last few conversations you've had with your mother, with your father. Where are you losing your voice? Where are you editing what you really want to say deep down? The stagnant nature of your relationship with your mother is indicative of your bondage. For some reason, you have become bound to continue to relate to her in a particular way. For some reason, your mother has become so powerful that at a certain point in the conversation, you lose the ability to think and you find yourself voiceless. You don't know how to respond. Now, some of you simply cannot bring yourself even to broach the subject of your parents' harm. In other words, it just feels too scary to say something specific like, Mom, Dad, I've come to realize some of the ways I was hurt by you growing up. Could we talk about it? It feels too scary just to say that. So, in that situation, what would it be like to take your mom to dinner and say, Mom, part of me would really like to talk to you about our relationship, but if I'm honest, I'm terrified of even broaching the subject with you. What would it feel like to just say that much? You don't need to talk about the harm itself. You don't need to say a single word about how your mother may have harmed you as a kid or now. Just talk about how hard it is to have a conversation with her and see what she does with your words, because your words are a pearl that you are offering her. If your mother is a garden variety sinner, she will respond with some measure of compassion about how awful it must be for you that you're afraid to talk to her. And she will feel some measure of shame and guilt that her son or daughter does not feel safe with her. Now, an important word of caution. Your task is not to convince your mother or father of wrongdoing. That's not your job. That's God's job. Your task is to tell them how you have experienced them. And this is true no matter who has harmed you. It is not your job to convince the other person of wrongdoing. It is your job to give them a pearl, which is to say, to tell them how you have experienced them. When you are committed to convincing and persuading another person of how they have harmed you, then you have become bound to that person. This is very important to understand. If you need the other person to acknowledge the harm in order for you to feel like it really happened and it really was hurtful, then you are more loyal to that other person than you are to God. One symptom of a soul tie with someone, one symptom that you are bound to another human being in an unhealthy way, is that you feel a desperate need to convince the other person of their wrongdoing. That's not your calling. That's the task of the Spirit of God. Your job is not to convince or persuade. Your job is simply to offer a pearl, which is to tell the other person how you have experienced them. Okay, that's enough for today. Thank you for listening. I know this is not easy stuff to listen to. In the next episode, the last episode in this series, part 5, we will look at what it means practically, very practically, to establish clear boundaries and courageous consequences. We'll look at those last two categories of how do you engage with someone who has done you harm. Please remember to consider supporting the podcast financially. You can do it from my website. Thank you so much.